Let's start with SacOil, which has identified EER as a partner in a joint venture that will give you a footprint into Nigeria. Is this an opportune time to be going to Nigeria?
Absolutely. For us, it's a game changer. SacOil has always looked at the upstream part of oil and gas. Our first assets were in the DRC, exploration. We always sought to have a balanced portfolio. Balanced portfolio means having assets that are both exploration, but also assets that are near-term production and production. Now, on the African continent, if you're looking at production, you want to go to the most prolific producer. And the most prolific producer on the continent is Nigeria.
Okay. Osamede, let's talk about going into Nigeria, the most prolific producer, the 8th largest producer of crude oil the world over, and said to have gas reserves over 160 trillion cubic feet. So just getting into that market, I mean, there's tremendous potential, but we know Nigeria has tremendous challenges.
Yeah, it depends on how you look at it, the challenges and the opportunity. Nigeria all along has been very tightly held by the IOCs, Oil has been produced there for over 50 years. Yeah. In the last, say, 10 years or so, we've seen the government trying to shake the grip of the IOCs and bring smaller companies into the sector. So that's where the opportunity is. And on the onshore, we see like the larger companies are trying to divest of some of their assets onshore to bring in smaller players. Now, the other issues are things like with where the government is going in terms of regulation. Yeah? So there, as you mentioned during the subplot, the Petroleum Industry Bill, which is an opportunity in itself because the bill aims to force the larger oil companies as well to let go of what they call marginal assets. Yeah.
Let's ask Robin whether he's anxious about the Petroleum Industry Bill. I mean, the ethos here is to indigenize oil production and get more local players within the market. So obviously you're looking at that opportunity. But also, it's made a lot of oil majors very, very nervous about investing in Nigeria. And many of them, because of this bill, because they're not sure, because it's still got to be ratified by the Senate, the implementation issues are forcing a lot of oil majors to hold back. What do you make of it?
Well, we see that as the opportunity to actually partner with an indigenous player who has access to those assets, and in partnering with that indigenous player, be able to grab or get hold of some of the marginal fields that are available in the bid round.
I mean, the point is, you mentioned the oil majors. The big problem the oil majors have is with the physical regime in the deep offshore. That's not what we're interested in.
Correct.
All right. By your estimation, how much is it going to cost you to tap into the untapped gas and oil deposits that exist in Nigeria, particularly gas? It's a very new frontier.
Well, I mean, we're firstly focusing on the oil space.
Right.
In terms of magnitude of investment, that varies depending on the field that we're looking at. I can only talk about the first transaction that we're closest to in terms of closing on. That first transaction really accounts sort of 100 million barrels oil equivalent to our JV, and has the potential to produce up to 30,000 barrels of oil per day. In that transaction, we would look at an acquisition, a farm-in fee of around about the $20 million mark, and a development cost to get to first oil of about $70 million. Now, in the great scheme of things, you're talking about an investment between the two parties of under $100 million for an asset which at 30,000 barrels of oil per day at $70 per barrel, if you look at the long-term oil price, gives you $2.1 million of revenue per day. So the payback is short in that sort of scenario.
Okay, Osamede, let's talk about EER and the general environment for upstream production in Nigeria. I mean, a lot of optimism here in terms of what you're going to get back, given the vast wealth and endowment of Nigeria. Yeah. But we do know Nigeria's had production problems, not least because of problems in the Niger Delta.
Yes. The problems that Nigeria has had have been social problems, of course. It has to do with the fact that many of the host communities felt that they were marginalized in terms of their access to the resources, and there were issues of the pollution of the creeks. The oil majors that accused the host communities or some of renegade elements of them of destroying it. Now, all that has long been resolved. The previous president, Yar'Adua, passed an amnesty program, which effectively has taken out the steam out of the problem. ER itself has been involved in negotiating settlements with host communities. So it's not a problem. Nigerian production, to show that the problem is gone away, Nigerian production has come back to its pre-crisis levels of 2.7 million barrels a day.
Okay, just talking about those communities that you service, I think a big issue right now in trying to retain an element of peace in the Niger Delta is to ensure that oil investors and companies that are coming into there start developing those communities. It's not just a question of extraction, profits, paying your royalties to the federal government. It's also about empowering those local communities and the environmental degradation issue, alleviating that.
Yeah, I agree. There's an historical issue here. When the oil companies first came into Nigeria, they were dealing with the chiefs and the federal government. You know, they paid their taxes. Some would argue they paid a great deal of royalties. And the argument was that the money that was being spent in tax and royalties were not flowing down to the communities. Now, we oil companies have now realized that we can't rely on the public sector and the state to provide those kinds of development work. And part of our structure now is to provide trust funds for those communities. And we get that written off our taxes anyway. So.
Okay, let's talk about why you decided to partner with EER. I know that they've worked extensively with other multinationals. We won't mention them, but they do have that history of getting into joint ventures with big oil majors as well. But in terms of giving you leverage in Nigeria, in a changing regulatory environment, how are they going to give you a competitive edge?
Well, they're known in Nigeria. They've worked with most of the majors in Nigeria, as you rightly pointed out. So that gives us a competitive edge because in this bid round, in this round of divestment that's been done by the majors, it's going to be done to indigenous companies, but indigenous companies that fulfill the criteria, if you like, and there's only a select group of those. But the main thing with EER, and we spent a long time understanding each other and understanding each other's ethos and philosophy. And from a business perspective and a social objective criteria, we share the same vision. You know, we're both native Africans, if you like. We both have had experience of working in the Western world, and what we want to do as respective companies is come back and deliver some value to our native country.
Let's talk about the margins in a country like Nigeria. We talk about the Petroleum Industry Bill and that you're changing sort of ownership perspectives, but also there's talk of removing fuel subsidies, for instance, and a lot of oil marketers are up in arms because it's going to feed into their margins, the cost of importing crude, getting it into the market, all those kinds of issues to contend with. Profitability in that kind of environment?
That's a totally different market from ours.
Right.
You're talking about the downstream, we're in the upstream. So
Right.
we produce the feedstock that goes into the downstream sector.
Right.
So those kinds of changes in the regulatory environment don't really affect
you
our business
at all.
At all.
Okay, and just solutions finally. In Nigeria, the president has made providing energy or electricity, as they call it, a huge hallmark of his administration. And he's also looking at the oil sector as providing a solution in terms of cogeneration, the gas flares, for instance, being fed into the system. Are you going to be part of those solutions?
Of course. I mean, most of the Nigerian reservoirs are stacked. So there's oil and gas. So you can't really develop the oil without having a solution for the gas. And many of our transactions, we've made proposals to the governments to provide gas feedstock into the power grid. So that's a very intricate part of our plans.
Innovations?
Innovations, absolutely, but innovations come with experience, and what we want to do is get on the ground on some of the acreage that we're looking to acquire, do the right thing, produce those assets, and having done that, look at what else we can do going forward.
Okay, and just beyond Nigeria, I know that everybody's looking into Ghana. You probably want to get into that market as well?
Well, SacOil has set its stall out to be a Pan-African upstream oil and gas company. So we would look in markets that have oil and gas potential. But naturally, in all those markets, we'll look for partners as well. We don't believe, as a South African company, that we can go out to other African countries and do that which we say we'll do without partners.